Hey friends, you pull the blanket over your shoulders and the night settles in like velvet. Somewhere, very far away, there might be the distant hum of a highway, or the flicker of a television someone forgot to turn off. But not here. Here, it's all cool stillness and the sound of your own breath. A single moth bumps gently against a window pane, its wings like parchment. The air smells faintly of old books and lavender oil. Imaginary maybe, but your brain doesn't care. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and local time. I love seeing where in the world you're tuning in from. The candle flickers, the blanket settles, and the village begins to appear. You're walking, no, trudging, along a dirt path so uneven it seems like the ground itself gave up centuries ago. To your left, a collapsed wooden fence gestures vaguely at a field full of lumpy green hills. Not the scenic kind. The kind that look like they're hiding something, but never do. You're approaching what locals once referred to as Penhead, a name that roughly translates to top of the sow, which somehow makes it sound more important than it ever was. Penhead isn't marked on any modern maps. It isn't on old ones either, unless you squint at the margins and misread an ink blot. That's the first sign something is a little off. As you pass a patch of thistles, you notice the silence. No birdsong, no rustling trees, just the occasional drip of something that sounds like cold water, finding a leak in your imagination. The village appears slowly, like it's unsure whether to be seen. A few thatched roof cottages sag like they've been holding their breath for a few hundred years too long. The timber is bleached, not from sun, but from time, and probably boredom. No smoke comes from the chimneys. The chimneys, in fact, look more decorative than functional, like someone once saw a drawing of a proper home and gave it their best guess. One cottage has a door that hangs slightly open, as though it expects someone but doesn't want to be too eager about it. You step inside and the air changes. Moustier, cooler, a faint scent of onions, oddly enough, despite no evidence of any food. There's a stool in the corner, a broken comb, a shelf of pottery with a single cup on it, its surface pitted with something green and powdery, which you decide not to inspect. This village once held around 60 people, give or take a plague year. Historians believe it peaked in the early 1300s, though peaked is generous. A few tax records mention it only to note it didn't owe anything. Not because it was exempt, but because it had nothing. But what's weird, what's really weird, is that Penhead didn't die the usual medieval death. No dramatic Viking raid, no fire, no mass burial site, just quiet. One year, it was there. The next, it wasn't. And people seem curiously uninterested in asking why. The oddity begins with the road, or more accurately, with the fact that it doesn't lead anywhere. Most villages in medieval Wales grew from crossroads, trade routes, or water access. But Penhead is surrounded by nothing. No river, no quarry, not even a decent patch of farmland unless you count the field that only grows thistles and a particularly hostile brand of moss. Some historians argue Penhead may have been a spiritual retreat, a kind of off-grid anchorite settlement. But the architecture doesn't match that. And if monks were here, they were the least productive monks ever. No scriptorium, no brewing, not even a single elaborate insult carved into a pew. Then there's the layout. Medieval villages had rhythm, order, a center, maybe a green, a church nearby, homes clustered for safety. But Penhead sprawls like someone dropped its buildings from the sky and left them where they landed. No real plan, no symmetry, just a slow spiral that leads you, oddly, back to where you started. Only things feel subtly rearranged. And then there's the well. You find it tucked behind the smallest cottage, so narrow it barely qualifies. It's lined with flat gray stones that don't match anything else in the village. You peer down and see nothing. Not darkness, just absence. A local superstition once warned children not to sing near the well, lest they hear a harmony echo back that wasn't their own voice. Of course, local superstitions also said turnips were good luck, so grain of salt. And still, no birds, not one. You pause near a wooden signpost that stands at a slant. It's long since faded, but something's scratched beneath the original lettering. Not carved, scratched in thin, erratic lines, like someone used a nail. It simply says, "You should not be here at night." Quaint. Of course, it's not night, not really, just an overcast twilight that refuses to end. Your footsteps on the packed earth don't make sound. They should. You even stomp a little just to be sure. Nothing. Maybe you're dreaming. That would be comforting. Penhyd's historical record is paper thin. A single monk's chronicle from 1294 mentions a settlement in the northern mist where time waits ill, which feels dramatic but not useful. And then there's the curious bit in the pipe rolls, those tax records from England, where a royal clerk notes that the sheriff found no persons and no beasts, but did hear a voice not belonging to himself, which again raises more questions than it answers. So what was Penhyd? A failed village? A strange experiment? A joke played by time? Some folklorists think it was deliberately erased, its name a placeholder for a place that never quite wanted to exist. Others say it was haunted from the beginning, that it was never built but grew, like mushrooms, overnight. One fringe theory, a favorite of reclusive academics, suggests the village might be built atop a Bronze Age boundary marker, something not meant to be crossed. The cottages follow a peculiar curve, one that almost mimics a standing stone circle, only broken, half-formed, like someone tried to imitate something older and failed. Of course, others argue Penhyd was just boring, uneventful, the kind of place where nothing of note ever happened. But even then, silence is a story too, especially when it listens back. You shuffle past the broken signpost with its ominous scratching, your foot catching slightly on a half-buried cobblestone. It's not much of a stumble, but it makes your pulse bump just enough to remind you that you're here, wherever here actually is. Penhyd doesn't seem interested in clarifying. The cottages become more distinct as you wander deeper, if distinct can be applied to buildings so thoroughly beige they look like they were designed by someone who only ever saw architecture in dreams. They lean into each other like gossiping old women, their moss-padded roofs drooping toward one another in a permanent shrug. And through the slanted doors and hollowed-out windows, you can make out the traces of life so ordinary it feels like performance art. There's a two-room home with a floor made of compacted soil, worn to a shine in the places feet moved most often. A pair of wooden shoes, clumsy, toe-pinching things, still sit by the threshold, pointing outward like someone left quickly, or vanished mid-step. You'll never know. A spindle lies tipped in a corner. Someone must have spun wool here, slowly, every evening, turning fleecy boredom into thread. No tapestry remains, just lint and a faint lanolin smell. Next door is a home slightly larger, an upgrade for someone mildly important, like the village reeve, or perhaps the guy who claimed to own the only functional bucket. Inside, you spot the broken handle of what might have once been a lute or a lyre. Not the romantic kind, though. This thing looks homemade and wildly off-tune, more weapon than instrument. You imagine a lullaby here could have ended marriages. And outside, a low stone wall circles a garden that clearly gave up centuries ago. Now, nettles rule the space, but some orderly rows of turned soil still linger beneath. You could swear you see hoofprints, but no animals. The day-to-day life in Penhyd was, by all accounts, incredibly boring. Farming small plots of indifferent soil, herding sheep that seemed just as indifferent, preparing meals out of barley, leeks, and the occasional rabbit if someone got lucky or persuasive. Villagers lived by the rhythm of work, prayer, and passive-aggressive disputes about property lines that no one could measure accurately. Mainstream history paints medieval village life as backbreaking and short, which it absolutely was. The average peasant worked from sunup to sundown, and still often died of tooth infections or infected blisters or sheer exhaustion. But in Penhyd, the backbreaking part seemed somehow gentler, slower, like the whole place moved on half speed. You pause outside one home where a long-forgotten domestic drama lingers like a cobweb. A short stone bench sits nearby, and you swear the air here is thicker, as if something happened. Local folklore tells of a pair of sisters who shared this house and went years without speaking to each other, despite sharing meals and chores. They communicated entirely through short notes left in unexpected places, on the underside of chairs, inside loaves of bread, even scratched into eggshells. One such note read, "Tell the goat I said no," which still confuses folklorists and chefs. Apparently, they argued for 7 years over a missing oatcake recipe. Not because it was especially good, no, it was described as crisp on the outside, troubling on the inside, but because each blamed the other for its disappearance. One sister insisted it had been stolen by a spirit known as the Grey One who sits wrong. The other accused her sibling of feeding it to a hedgehog out of spite. There are no winners in that story, only crumbs. A surviving piece of oral tradition, recorded by a wandering balladeer in the late 1400s, mentions a town where quarrels held more passion than love, and love hid behind hedges. Scholars believe that may be Penhyd, though others insist it better fits with a village called Leontol, whose residents famously married and divorced each other cyclically, depending on the sheep market. And yet, for all the mundane strangeness, no one seems to have left Penhyd for any other settlement. There are no migration records, no bursts of surnames appearing elsewhere. The names just stop, as though everyone folded up their family trees and walked off the margins. You step into what was likely the village's communal hall, or the closest they had to one. It's modest, a rectangular building with walls of wattle and daub, and a fire pit in the center, long since filled with stones. On one side, a carved beam shows crude symbols, triangles, spirals, and something that might be an owl, or a really judgmental potato. Historians still argue whether this space was used for gathering, praying, or storing something best left unnamed. There's no consensus. One bold academic insisted the spiral carvings matched Breton Druidic marks, but another pointed out they could also just be the doodles of a bored child with a stick and a little too much free time. You sit on the edge of a beam, and a splinter threatens mutiny against your pants. The silence here is intense. Not oppressive exactly, but heavy. Like it remembers everything said in this room and has decided none of it was worth repeating. The air grows colder. Not suddenly, not dramatically. Just enough that you notice your breath beginning to fog, which is strange because it's summer in the story. Outside again, you pass a small cluster of trees, ash and rowan, bent into strange angles like they've been listening at windows. The grass crunches slightly underfoot, dry in patches where it shouldn't be. And as you stand among the trees, you realize something that sends a small, slow shiver down your spine. The cottages here all face inward, toward something. But that something is missing or invisible. You stand at the center of their gaze and feel exactly like a rabbit on a stage. You don't move, not because you're afraid, but because it feels like something might be listening for movement. Eventually, you take a breath and back away, slowly, feeling the eyes of architecture behind you. The sun, if there is a sun, hasn't moved, or if it has, it's in on the joke. The village of Penhyd lives in a bubble, a loop, not preserved by time, but possibly ignored by it. The people who once lived here lived quiet, ordinary, low-drama lives, but beneath the dullness is a constant undertow. The quiet isn't absence, it's weight, and in places like this, weight builds. You leave the ring of inward-facing houses and follow a new path. A rut, really, worn by wooden wheels that must have turned long after the people were gone. The cart it belonged to is never found, but its path leads directly to the manor, and that's where things get slightly less boring. The manor is not what you'd expect. Not a grand castle, not even a fortified hall. It's barely taller than the cottages you just left behind, but it tries to look important, like a child at a wedding who insists on wearing a hat too big for his head. Stone walls, cracked and flecked with lichen, lean outward at odd angles. The slate roof is mostly intact, though a patch near the center looks as if something once landed on it. Something heavy and enthusiastic. There's no door, just a frame, dark and hollow like a mouth mid-sentence. You step in, the temperature drops immediately, and not in a "this is a stone building, what did you expect" sort of way. It's different. It's like the air here isn't used to being disturbed, like it forgot people were a thing. Inside, it's wider than it looked from outside. A main chamber with two supporting beams, one whole, one split, and propped up with a forked branch someone jammed underneath a few hundred years too late. There's a fireplace, naturally. It's huge, overcompensating. The soot has long since stopped clinging to the chimney, but you can still smell the faintest char. And underneath that, a sweeter scent, just barely there. Cloves, maybe dried orange peel, or something pretending to be either. This was the residence of Penhid's feudal lord. His name, such as anyone remembers it, was Ifan ap Modog, and he was a minor noble. So minor, in fact, that when King Edward's officials visited for tax collection, they once asked him to point out the real landowner. Historical records call him dour, unremarkable, and in one case, intermittently visible, which might have been a metaphor, or not. Ifan's family didn't exactly shine in the Welsh aristocracy. They held a few plots of land, mostly because no one else wanted them, and while other lords built up their homes with defensive walls, arrow slits, and private chapels, Ifan seemed content with simplicity. A thatched barn, a few cows, and a servant whose name was possibly either Murfin or Boy. Yet, for a man so bland, he owned one very strange thing. A room. Not just any room, a sealed room, tucked in the far corner of the manor, past a curtained doorway no taller than a short bookshelf. The curtain's long gone now, just a rod and a pair of rusted hooks, but the room is still there, and locked. The door is iron-banded wood, and it looks newer than the rest of the building. Not Home Depot 2006 new, more like replaced 3 centuries after the rest of the house collapsed new. The hinges are massive, not decorative, functional, preventive. You put your hand on it. It's warm, not just room temperature warm. Now, historians, being the delightful skeptics they are, argue about this room constantly. Some believe it was a pantry that was bricked up during the famine years. Others say it was a chapel used for secret worship after a brief flirtation with heretical movements. A few lean into the local legends and claim it was a binding chamber, not for people, mind you, for something else. In one account from a 16th century surveyor named Hugh Glynn, he notes a visit to the ruins of Penhyd and mentions the innermost chamber of that house, which breathed as though alive. He wrote that, didn't elaborate, and then promptly died of a sudden fall into fire, which seems statistically unlikely unless you are either very clumsy or followed home by something disappointed in your note-taking. Inside the main room of the manor, you see something scratched into the fireplace stone. 3 interlocking circles, not quite a Triskelion, not quite a family crest. It doesn't match any known symbols in Welsh heraldry, but appears again, faintly, on the iron of the sealed door's handle. Theories abound. Some claim Ifan ap Modog went mad in his later years, shutting himself inside for days, only emerging to mutter about the guest below the grain. Others believe he simply had gout and was hiding from peasant complaints. One particularly bold friar, who wrote anonymously, and probably after a mead too many, claimed the Lord kept a mouth that never closed and never fed, hidden in his house. But that's probably just poetry. Probably. You glance upward. There's a small hole in the ceiling above the hearth, not a window, more like a vent. The light through it is weird, diffused, pale, as if it had to go through something else before reaching you. Something not glass. A faint breeze snakes through the manor, and as it touches your neck, the iron door creaks, not open. Just enough to make a noise that doors shouldn't make unless they're thinking about it. You leave, slowly, respectfully. Back outside, the sky has changed again. Not darker, just quieter, if that's even a thing. The grass no longer waves. The trees are perfectly still. And somewhere behind you, the sealed room continues to wait. Not impatiently, just eternally. The strange thing is, Ifan left no heir, no will, no clear ending. The manor was just abandoned, years before the rest of the village. Yet his name kept showing up. In land disputes, in royal footnotes, in arguments among monks about who was supposed to tend to which territory, as though he was still involved. Long after he should have been gone. Some speculate he never died. Some say he wasn't allowed to. One of the oldest fragments of local poetry includes the line, "The Lord who could not lie down kept a door for what crawled in dreams." No one knows what that means, but somehow it feels accurate. As you walk away from the manor, something occurs to you. The village is empty, yes, but it doesn't feel abandoned. It feels paused, as if everyone just stepped out for a moment, or ducked behind the walls, or crouched, waiting for you to pass. And behind you, in that room, with no key, no sound, and no explanation, something waits, still warm, behind cold iron. Your path takes a lazy bend away from the manor, dipping gently toward a structure that looks like it forgot what it was built for halfway through construction. It's a squat little building, stone, mostly, partially sunken into the earth, as if it's been sulking there for centuries, trying not to be noticed. The roof bows inward at the center, moss growing in dense tufts, like the scalp of an aging giant. The bell hangs crooked in its tower, if you can even call it a tower. It's barely a story high, more of a vertical shrug above the entrance, but there it is, a bronze bell, cracked clean through one side, suspended by what looks suspiciously like a reused wagon axle. You stand at the threshold. No door. Just a wide wooden beam that must once have swung closed, long since rotted away or, according to one vaguely spooky account, simply walked off into the moor one night. The air inside is colder, and not in a welcome way. It's the kind of cold that feels targeted, the kind that knows your spine has a middle and goes straight for it. This was the village church, and it is, without exception, the saddest little church you've ever seen. The pews are more like benches, flat, backless, splintery. One has been chewed on. By what, no one can say, but the teeth marks are wide, blunt. Not human, but not quite animal either. Up front, a stone altar sits slightly off-center, not for aesthetic reasons, just off. The floor beneath it dips awkwardly, and the whole thing leans slightly, like a man with a sore foot. Behind the altar, a stained glass window, or it was once stained glass. Now it's mostly holes, jagged bits of blue and red, and one small, intact panel that still shows what might be a wing, or a flame, or both. The glass has no soot on it, despite the smoke-darkened beams above. It's oddly clean, like it's been polished, recently. You sit on one of the benches. It groans, loudly, in protest. There's dust everywhere, but none on the altar. And the bell, still visible through the broken rafters above, sways just slightly in a breeze you don't feel on your skin. It used to ring every Sunday. That much we know. The villagers weren't deeply religious, not in the way towns closer to abbeys were, but they came, every week. Rain or fog, or the occasional shower of frogs, which happened once in 1342 and was explained away as God's messy punctuation. The bell rang off rhythm, always. Never quite at the top of the hour, never quite with the same tone twice. Locals said it echoed the heartbeats of those in attendance, which sounds poetic until you hear it ring after everyone's gone home, and then one summer it stopped. Just didn't ring. No one pulled the rope, not even the Reeves grandson, who loved the attention of being the bellboy. The villagers gathered anyway, because habit is hard to kill. They sat in silence, looked around, whistled awkwardly, and then left. The next Sunday, same thing. By the third Sunday, someone noticed that the bell had rung, only not in the morning. It had chimed once, in the middle of the night, around the hour of foxes, loud, clear, off-key of course, and when a few brave or bored villagers went to check it the next day, they found the rope coiled neatly on the floor, damp, as if it had been dragged through water, which is odd, because there's no water in the bell tower, and it hadn't rained. From then on, the bell rang whenever it wanted. Once at dawn, once in the afternoon, once during a thunderstorm when lightning had already struck the tower twice and most people thought it was trying to quit. The sound changed too. Less bronze, more breathy, like metal trying to hum through a throat. Some people stopped attending. Others sat closer to the exit. One woman, Enid, a weaver, insisted the bell said her name on Pentecost Sunday, said it 3 times, then never again. A fringe theory? That the bell wasn't cast in bronze at all, or at least not entirely. Some say it contains fragments of a much older artifact, possibly Roman, possibly older still. One scrap of parchment from a Carmelite scribe claims the bell sings with the breath of the buried. It's a pretty phrase, it's also deeply unhelpful. What is helpful is the graffiti you find, scratched into the underside of the altar. You have to lie on your back and squint to read it. Something no priest would ever endorse, but there it is, a single line of Old Welsh, roughly translated as, "Do not offer what listens back," which raises a couple of questions. First, what were they offering? Second, who was doing the listening? Historians still argue whether the church was built atop something older, a pagan shrine perhaps, a druidic grove. Some claim that the alignment of the church's windows follows a solstice pattern. Sunlight hits the altar only once a year, and not even on a holy day. Others dismiss this as coincidence or the result of bad medieval math, which was mostly done with guesswork and string. You glance back at the bell. It's swaying again, only now you do feel a breeze, cool, sweet, smelling faintly of thyme. The herb, not the concept, though both would be appropriate here. There's a room off to the side, a vestry maybe, or storage. The door is missing, but the frame is intact, and there's a deep black shadow inside that seems thicker than it should be, like it resists your gaze. You take one step toward it. The bell rings, not a full chime, just a half toll, a note cut off mid-breath, and suddenly you remember you've left the vestry unvisited, just like everyone else seems to have done, for centuries. So you turn around, back into the church's main space. The floor creaks once, loudly, despite being made of stone, which shouldn't creak. Outside again, the sun hasn't moved. Time here is more of a suggestion, but the quiet feels deeper now, not heavier, just more. And behind you, the cracked bell gives one final twitch and goes still, for now. The path curves gently away from the church, your feet landing softly on what might once have been flagstones, though now they're more like memories of a road. Grass has grown over most of them, moss curling around the edges in sleepy spirals. A breeze passes, gentle, aimless, slightly suspicious, and then you see the house, taller than most, built from stones darker than the rest of the village, blacker, glossier somehow, like they got wet once and never fully dried. This was the guest house, not for travelers exactly, more for visitors of status, clergy, minor nobility, the occasional royal auditor, people who didn't really want to be in Penhide but had run out of ways to avoid it. They stayed here, mostly out of politeness, before inventing an urgent reason to leave early. The door creaks when you touch it, not from resistance, from recognition. Inside, it's dustless. That's the first thing you notice. no cobwebs, no thick velvet coating of time, just space. Clean, silent, strangely empty space, as though someone's been tidying up just enough to keep things unsettled. The hearth is cold, but arranged with logs that haven't crumbled. The bed is made. Crisp, tucked corners. The blanket looks newer than it should be. There's even a basin in the corner with water that hasn't evaporated. Your reflection in it looks a bit unsure, like it wants to ask questions but isn't sure if now is the right time. This is where the bishop stayed. Once, in 1327, Bishop Ainan of St. Asaph made a surprise visitation to Penhyd. Officially, it was to assess the spiritual welfare of the villagers. Unofficially, it was because someone sent a letter, unsigned, claiming the local church was unsound in soul and stone. Ainan arrived with 2 monks and a very small horse. Witness accounts say the horse seemed embarrassed to be there. The bishop met with the reeve, the villagers, and even Lord Ifan, who reportedly asked him, "Do you hear it yet?" 3 times in a row, without clarifying what it was. Ainan made polite noises, ate part of a goose, blessed things, and then he retired to the guest house. For one night, he left before dawn without saying goodbye, walked straight to his horse, climbed on backward, corrected himself, then rode off without his monks, who woke to find his room empty, the sheets damp, and a rosary left behind in the basin. He never spoke of Penhyd again. Not to the court, not to his abbey, not even to his confessor. Just moved on, quickly. But something odd happened a year later. The bishop began collecting locks. Not metaphorically, literally. Padlocks, keys, bolts, latches. He'd install them on cabinets, wardrobes, sometimes rooms with nothing inside them. He even requested a lock for his cathedral's bell rope. Unprecedented and frankly confusing. He died in 1333, quietly in his study, surrounded by locked drawers and one window nailed shut from the inside. The connection to Penhyd was never officially drawn, but you feel it now, standing here, where he once lay awake, listening. The guest room is strange, not haunted exactly, but watched. The windows don't quite show what they should. One faces east, but the light comes in from the side. Another faces a stone wall, but you can swear you see movement. Slow, deliberate, like someone pacing just beyond view. There's a desk in the corner. On it, a single item, a piece of parchment, cracked and yellowed, with words in faded ink that reads, "It speaks in sleep." No signature, no punctuation, no explanation. You look under the bed, nothing. But the wood smells faintly of ash, not like firewood. More like something that didn't want to burn. You lie down on the bed for a moment, just to feel it. The mattress is made of straw and feathers, surprisingly comfortable. But the pillow is warm, and not from you. You sit up, slowly. There are no footsteps outside, but you get the sense that someone is about to knock. The feeling passes. You leave the room. Out back, behind the guest house, is a little garden, neatly arranged, not overgrown. In fact, the soil looks freshly turned. There are herbs here, sage, feverfew, and something with curling, sharp leaves you can't identify. Something that hums, very quietly, if you stand close enough. Folklore tells of only one other guest who stayed in this room, a wandering scribe from Monmouth, whose diary includes the line, "I slept not, for the dreams were not my own." He recorded vivid visions of bells tolling underwater, of mouths in walls that whispered riddles, and of a stone that bled from the inside when cracked. That scribe never returned to Penhyd, but he drew a diagram of the village before he left. One that shows buildings no longer standing, and one small mark, an X, in the room you're standing in now. No one knows why. Some speculate that the room is built over a fault line, geological or spiritual, that the cracks in the floorboards are part of something deeper, that Bishop Ainan didn't flee because of what he saw, but because of what he heard. That single line, "It speaks in sleep." But what does it say? Historians still argue whether the phrase is literal, metaphorical, or just the rambling of a sleepless man. One medieval linguist even proposed it's a mistranslation, suggesting the original phrase might have meant, It sings while dreaming, which is not better. You step out of the house, back into the quiet. The grass is still. The sky has not shifted, but the light has changed, barely. Enough to make shadows longer than they should be. And from the guest house behind you, the faint creak of a bed frame shifts under weight that isn't yours. You walk faster now, just a little. Not because you're afraid, but because you're starting to wonder whether you're the guest, or the one being visited. You follow the path again, or what's left of it, through a tangle of hedgerows that seem too intentional to be wild. The branches are thick with hawthorn and dry ivy, but there's a pattern to their growth, as if someone once trimmed them into shapes that meant something, and time just forgot the purpose. A breeze rustles through them, and you hear it again, that almost sound, like distant fabric tearing, or breath moving backward. Eventually you reach the mill. Every village had one, more or less. Even the truly pitiful ones tried to fashion something with a wheel and a canal and some grinding stones. And Penhid, ever the overachiever in understated weirdness, had a perfectly constructed watermill, with no water. The stream nearby curves beautifully, just as a stream should, yet it flows just far enough to not touch the wheel, as if the mill were built in the wrong place on purpose, or as if the stream had second thoughts. The wheel itself is intact, slightly warped but functional, mossy, sure, wood swollen with age, but structurally sound. The bucket scoops are even still attached. All it needs is water and someone foolish enough to turn it. You step inside the mill house. It smells like old flour and ghostly rodents. The air is thick with the scent of dried grain that shouldn't still linger. The interior is still, the kind of stillness that presses against your ears. And the millstone, already turning. Just slightly, just enough. There's no mechanism engaged. No flowing stream, no rope or animal-driven wheel. But the massive round stone shifts with a patience that is deeply not human. Locals called it ghost bread. The mill, after all, produced flour. Flour makes bread. And bread, in Penhid, was sacred in a way that edged into uneasy territory. One story tells of a child who ate bread from this mill and slept for 3 days straight. When he woke, he spoke in riddles for a week and was terrified of mirrors until he turned 20. Then he became a baker. He vanished shortly after. In the archives of a nearby priory, there's a half-finished note about Penhid's mill, written by a visiting friar. They bake by moon, and the bread does not burn, which sounds poetic until you realize it was written in July, during a heat wave, with no visible fuel. The strangest part? The bread kept appearing long after the village went empty. Travelers, those rare enough to pass through, would find it, on stone steps, in baskets woven from twine no one recognized, sometimes just resting on the grass. It wasn't good bread, mind you, tough crust, soft inside, no salt, but edible, barely. People called it hollow loaf, and it always came with the same feature, a single thumbprint on the bottom, too large to be human, as though it had been checked for doneness. A fringe theory, floated by an eccentric antiquarian with a fondness for beer and unreliable maps, claimed the mill was powered by sound, that the wheel could turn if you sang to it in just the right tone. Others say it was powered by something older, something underground, that the building wasn't made to mill grain, but to muffle what was beneath. And still, that slow, tiny rotation continues. You peer down into the trap door near the back of the mill. Most mills had them, a way to access the lower gears. This one has no ladder, just a dark hole with the faintest odor of yeast and iron. You lean a bit closer. There's a hum, not mechanical, not electrical, organic, like breath or song, but only for a second, then it's gone. You back away. On one wall, someone painted a series of symbols in a reddish-brown pigment, worn nearly invisible by age, but still legible. 3 circles, a vertical line, a small, open mouth. The same mouth symbol was found elsewhere in the village, etched faintly on the underside of a pew, and on the fireplace stone in the manor. The mouth is always open. One chronicler wrote that the villagers believed the mill didn't just grind grain, it collected voices. that the stones stored every conversation spoken within the walls, spinning them slowly into powder over the years. That if you leaned close to the stone as it turned, you could hear secrets pressed into flour, but only if the stone turned for you. One monk tried it. He didn't hear voices, he spoke them, 7 at once in 7 different languages. He fled, moved to York, took a vow of silence, good choice. Historians still argue whether the mill was ever operational in the traditional sense. No record of grain yield, no ledgers, no sacks or tools. But something kept the place tidy. The windows don't break, the doors don't sag. Dust only accumulates where you aren't looking. You exit into the light. The wheel creaks once, as if saying goodbye, or calling you back. Outside you find an odd pile of crumbs beneath a yew tree. Fresh. No birds, no ants. Just crumbs, evenly scattered. You brush one with your finger. It dissolves like ash. And just before you turn away, you spot a small clay tablet, half buried in the earth. You lift it. On one side, 3 circles. On the other, a single word, carved in deep, crude letters. Risen. It's probably nothing. It's always nothing. Until it isn't. You set it down and keep walking, the wind barely stirring the tall grass as you go. Somewhere behind you, the wheel keeps turning, slow, steady, patient, grinding nothing, or everything. The path leading away from the mill narrows into a soft dirt track, half lost under layers of flattened grass and years of indecision. It feels less like a road now and more like a memory of movement, like the land still remembers being walked on, even if no one's done it in centuries. You're headed toward the village green, which, to be perfectly clear, is not green. It's more of a suspicious beige, tufted with wiry grass that looks like it gave up growing halfway through. The center is marked by a crooked post, the kind that once held colorful bunting or a notice board. Now it leans at such an angle that you suspect it's only upright out of habit. This is where the villagers held their festival, once a year, without fail. The festival of St. Rodri's Day. St. Rodri, as far as historians can tell, was not officially canonized, or martyred, or even confirmed to exist. The name appears in one ledger, written in 2 different hands, and may have actually been Rod, short for Roderick, short for the Reeves cousin who could play the flute with his nose. But that didn't stop Penhead. Every midsummer they celebrated. It was never impressive. There were no great games, no epic songs, no food that would win contests, but they tried. They really, really tried. The maypole was always lopsided, the pies undercooked, the dancing erratic. People from neighboring villages came once, felt deeply uncomfortable, and never returned. A surviving poem from the 15th century refers to Penhead's festival as, "Where joy goes to nap and mirth gets stuck in the mud." You find the maypole's base still jammed into the earth. A ring of stones surrounds it, not decorative, containing. The pole itself lies nearby, snapped in 2, the wood grayed and splintered like an old toothpick. There's still a scrap of ribbon fluttering weakly from one end, faded blue, stained by time or something more curious. You walk the circle once, then twice, and on the 3rd turn you notice it, a dark red streak on one of the broken stones. Sap, maybe, or something pretending to be sap. See, one year, no one remembers exactly which, something changed. A midsummer evening, the maypole already up, the villagers already halfway into lukewarm cider and questionable cheese, when someone noticed that the pole was bleeding. Not gushing, not horror movie levels. Just a slow, thick weep of dark red running down the wood grain. They said it smelled sweet, too sweet, like overripe berries left too long in the sun. Someone touched it. They say that person forgot their own name for 3 days and kept speaking in rhymes that didn't scan. After that, no one wanted to take the pole down. It just stood there for months, oozing gently. Bees came and left. Birds refused to perch near it. A fox was seen circling it 3 times before walking straight into the stream and lying down. Finally, the pole snapped in a windless night. No storm, no obvious cause. Just a single crack like a gunshot. And then it fell. And that was the last festival. The year after, no one mentioned it. The maypole stayed down, the food went uncooked. The bunting remained in storage, tangled in a way no one could undo. Some say the village chose to stop celebrating. Others say the celebration chose to stop them. A few surviving sketches from a monk who wandered into Penhid that summer show an image of the pole, not just bleeding, but wrapped in vines that appeared overnight. Sharp-edged vines, each with a single white flower that never wilted. When asked about the image later, the monk couldn't recall having drawn it. You move to the far side of the green, where several flat stones are half buried in a semicircle. Seats maybe, or boundary markers. They're smooth on top, but rough underneath, as if they were flipped at some point. One has a carving, faint, but visible in the right light. It's that open mouth again, always open, always waiting. Historians still argue whether the festival had pagan origins. It's tempting to think so. Midsummer, poles, circles, mysterious bleeding trees. But no concrete link has been made. Some claim the festivities were merely a quirky form of Christian devotion. Others think it was all a cover for older rites. One scholar, often quoted, rarely taken seriously, suggested the pole marked a pin site, a location used to hold something in place, something under the village. Of course, there's also the perfectly boring explanation: faulty wood, sap pockets, an unusually sugary tree species. But trees don't hum, and the pole, as one woman insisted, hummed. You hear nothing now, just the wind shifting across the green. And yet, there's that sensation again, that tiny tickle at the back of your neck, like something's watching, not malevolent, just present, patient. Near one of the broken benches, you spot something odd. A shoe, small, child-sized, but old. Handmade leather, stitched carefully with what looks like twine or sinew. It's perfectly preserved, no rot, no mold, just resting there in the grass like it was set down yesterday. No sign of the other shoe, or the wearer. You leave it alone. As you walk away from the green, the maypole's snapped stump creaks softly behind you, not in the wind, in the stillness, as if settling or shifting or exhaling. You don't look back, not right away, but you do notice that the ribbon, it's no longer fluttering. It's gone still, just like the rest of the village. The village green fades behind you, swallowed up by the hush that wraps around everything here like a blanket you didn't ask for, but now can't take off. The wind's taken a break again. The trees, too. Even your footsteps seem reluctant now, as if each one has to convince the earth it's worth the effort. You find yourself walking toward a low rise in the landscape, a soft swell of hill that locals used to call Y Bryn Toll, or the Quiet Hill. Sounds peaceful, right? Almost soothing, except no one ever picnicked there. No sheep grazed it. Children didn't play near it. They tried to once. The hill didn't like it. At least that's what the shepherds used to say. It starts, as these things always do, with socks. A shepherd named Emrys, who, by all accounts, was entirely ordinary and the proud owner of 3.5 working teeth, began losing socks. Not in the laundry, not to wayward goats, just losing them. He'd go to bed with a pair on his feet and wake up with only one. No sign of the other, not in the sheets, not under the bed, not outside, just gone. It became a running joke, until it wasn't, because then the sheep started disappearing. One at a time, always the youngest, always on foggy nights. No blood, no struggle, just a gap in the flock and a patch of flattened grass leading toward the quiet hill. Emrys, desperate to prove he wasn't sleep-herding, staked out the hill one night. He never spoke about what he saw, but he stopped shepherding, and one morning his house was found empty, still warm. Porridge on the table, chair pulled out, one sock in the middle of the room, the other in the hearth, unburned. That's when the humming started. Locals described it as a sound you don't hear so much as realize you've been hearing all along. It came at dusk, low, almost musical, not from above, not from below, from within the hill, like breath through stone. You're there now, standing at the base of that unassuming slope. It's barely taller than a farmhouse, covered in yellowed grass and bramble, nothing special, until you notice the way the air bends around it. The wind doesn't cross it. It splits, like it's dodging something. And you notice, too, how the birds avoid the sky directly above. Even insects veer off course. One particularly bold moth tries, falters, then drifts sideways like it forgot where it was going. You climb slowly. The earth feels wrong, not soft, not firm, just disinterested, as if it's letting you walk on it only because it's too polite to say no. At the top, a patch of exposed stone, black, smooth, warm. You place your hand on it. It vibrates, faintly, like it's humming. The hill is hollow, and something inside is singing. You step back, and nearly trip over the cairn. It's small, a stack of stones, carefully arranged, not old, not new either, but deliberate. At its base, a small bone. Sheep, maybe? Human, possibly. You don't touch it. Instead, you look down the far side of the hill, and there it is. A dip in the earth, almost like a sinkhole, but gentle, shallow, with a circle of mushrooms around its edge. White caps, pale stems, two perfectly spaced. One's been knocked over. In the center, a small cloth bundle. You don't want to open it, so you don't. Instead, you remember what the old tale said. When the hill hums, stay below. When it sighs, don't go alone. No one could explain the sighing, but one elderly woman, long since passed, once told a visiting vicar that the hill was not the ghost of a place, but the lungs of one. He thought she was being poetic, until his socks vanished. You're not sure if it's funny or unsettling that the quietest part of Penhide is the hill that hums. Historians still argue whether this mound is natural or not. A barrow, a burial site, some ancient ritual mound left over from pre-Roman days? Archaeological surveys found nothing conclusive. The ground's magnetic field was inconsistent. Their word, not helpful. One theory suggests it was once a signal hill, used to send smoke messages across the valleys. Another claims it's a collapsed hollow, part of a cavern system that extends below Penhide, now sealed and slowly settling. But local records tell a stranger story. Every time something disappeared, a sheep, a sock, even a person, the hill would hum slightly longer the next night, as if it was digesting. You walk down the slope, careful not to disturb the mushrooms. The air feels heavier now, like it's been listening. You hear something behind you, not a voice, not a sound, just the sense of expectation. You keep walking. The hill doesn't follow, but it remembers. You continue down the slope, not looking back. Not because you're scared necessarily, but because there's a soft rule in places like this. Don't check if it's following. Just move forward. Let the weird settle behind you like dust. The track winds between two moss-covered walls that seem too low to be defensive and too deliberate to be random. One curves slightly, as if avoiding something no longer there. The other ends in what looks like the skeleton of a gate. Just two upright posts and a rusted hinge pointing at nothing. And then you see it. Standing in the field beyond, nibbling at a patch of clover, is a goat. That wouldn't be notable except for its eyes. They're not goat eyes. Goat eyes, if you've ever looked closely, are weird enough. Horizontal pupils, always a bit smug. But this goat's eyes, human, not just human-shaped, human. Hazel brown, too focused, too thoughtful, too present. It blinks at you, slowly, then returns to chewing as if you're the odd one here. This is Mari. Yes, the goat had a name. Of course she did. In Penhide, livestock had a way of crossing boundaries. There are entire family trees in village archives that list goats as cousin adjacent. Mari was beloved and slightly feared. She appeared one spring, trotting into the village from the western woods with no rope, no mark, and no fear. She chose the Reeves' yard as her territory and would butt anyone who questioned her judgment. She slept wherever she liked. She once wandered into the chapel during Mass and bleated 3 times during the sermon. Some say this was a warning. Others say it was a commentary. One day she started watching people, not glancing, watching, and then came the Latin. It began with the miller's wife. She was walking past Mary and swears she heard the goat mutter, "Agnus non est hic." Roughly, "The lamb is not here." She dropped her basket. Soon others had similar tales. The shepherd swore the goat whispered, "Dormit nunc." He sleeps now, while standing atop a hay cart. The baker's apprentice claimed Mary asked him for salt. The vicar didn't believe any of it, until Mari stared at him for 5 uninterrupted minutes, chewed once, and said, clear as day, "Memento." That was the vicar's last day in Penhid. To be fair, he'd already been considering a transfer. Some claimed it was mass hysteria. Others believed the goat had been touched by divine light, or cursed by a druidic remnant, or had eaten something with ancient runes in it. One particularly odd theory suggested Mary wasn't a goat at all, but a punishment. A human soul condemned to animal form for crimes long forgotten, a kind of mystical house arrest. Then again, Mari once stole and ate an entire wheel of cheese, then chased the blacksmith into a bush. So, could go either way. You take a step forward. Mari lifts her head and meets your eyes. It's like staring into a mirror that knows a little too much. Then she bleats, once sharply, and turns, trotting off behind a hedge and disappearing entirely. No sound of hooves, no rustling, just gone. You follow, of course, because how could you not? Behind the hedge, you find a narrow trail, hidden between thick hedgerow and a cluster of dying apple trees. It leads to a clearing you don't remember being there a minute ago. And in that clearing, a circle of stones. You're not surprised anymore, but it's still weird. There are 7 stones, each about knee height, worn smooth and oddly warm despite the shaded ground. The center of the circle is hollowed, either by use or intent, and inside lies something wrapped in faded wool. You approach but don't unwrap it. Instead, you look at the stone nearest you. It has a faint engraving, the open mouth again, this time with a tongue. That's new. You back away, respectfully. Mari never returned after that summer. No one knew where she went, but the dreams started soon after. Villagers reported seeing her in their sleep, always watching, always waiting, sometimes speaking, not Latin this time, but a different voice. One villager swore she spoke in his own voice. Another said she heard 3 overlapping versions of "Come Home." A folklorist who later compiled these stories called Mari an intercessor. Someone, or something, that stood between worlds and occasionally offered commentary. The goat with human eyes was never explained, not officially, but one scholar noticed that in old Welsh texts, goats are sometimes associated not with mischief or stubbornness, but with witnessing, the idea that they remember things humans try to forget, which is fine until one of them starts speaking. The clearing fades behind you as you return to the path. The hedges close in a little more than before. The light filters through thinner now. You feel a slight weight in your pocket and find somehow a single clover leaf tucked inside. Not 4, just 1, unblemished. You don't remember picking it up, but it's there, and somehow you get the distinct impression that Marie remembers you now too. You keep walking, and even though the path doesn't change much, same roots underfoot, same tang of lichen in the air, you notice something strange as you move forward. The trees begin to lean, not just naturally, deliberately. They're tilted eastward, all of them, as if bowing toward something unseen, or trying to avoid eye contact with whatever lies behind them. And then you come to the graveyard. Every village had one, even Penhid, but this one, it's wrong. You don't see it at first. It just looks like a gentle slope dotted with flat stones and crosses of weather-worn wood. But then you stand in the center and the angle hits you, literally. The entire graveyard tilts east, not in a gentle, oh the soil shifted way, but in a full-body lean, like someone tried to pour the dead in from one side. Headstones teeter at angles that make you feel vaguely seasick. The crosses lean like they've been caught mid-fall. You adjust your stance to compensate. That helps. Barely. Folklore says the graveyard was never quite right. Not from the beginning. The first burial, a woman named Alice, age 29, cause of death. Melancholy and accident, was done at high noon. Standard practice. Except the shadow of the priest fell the wrong direction. No one noticed until later, but it kept happening. Every burial, a new oddity. Tools went missing. Graves dug themselves an extra foot deep overnight. One grave, for a young boy named Lou, was dug twice, 3 years apart. Same size, same spot, same name, same age. The old stone in the middle of the yard is called the Watcher. Not because it looks like a face, it doesn't. It looks like a half-melted loaf of bread, but still, locals insisted it watched. That standing with your back to it for too long meant you'd dream of digging. You test it, just a little, because of course you do. You turn around and stare at the crooked rows. The names are faded, and some aren't names at all, just initials. One grave is marked only with a circle and a line beneath it. No cross, no words. No one knows who lies there, or what. You step carefully between the rows, noting that some graves have shifted. Literally. The earth is pulled in strange directions, as if each burial was a tug of war, and the coffin didn't quite want to go the same way. Local superstition claimed that after the fog rolled in, thick and white and soft as milk, you should never check the graveyard until the third day. Let them settle, they said. Let the fog finish measuring, they whispered, which is a choice of words. You crouch beside one grave that seems older than the rest. The headstone is broken clean in half, as if something pressed upward from beneath. The inscription is mostly gone, but the last word is clear. Below, there's no record of whose grave it is, no mention in the parish register. But there's a depression in the soil that never quite fills. Once, a traveler camping nearby reported seeing someone walk out of the graveyard just before dawn. Slowly, barefoot, silent. They disappeared behind the trees and left no tracks. When he checked the cemetery later, all the stones were in different positions. No one believed him, of course, but the next day he left town, quickly. Historians still argue whether the cemetery shifted naturally. Soil erosion, soft terrain, geological weirdness. Some even suggest seismic activity, though Penhid sits nowhere near a fault line. Others suggest the stones were moved by later villagers for reasons now lost. But the unsettling thing is, the graves only shift after the fog, and Penhid has a lot of fog. You make your way toward the far end of the graveyard, where the ground dips slightly into a muddy hollow. There, partially submerged, is a grave marker made of black stone, not local, imported from somewhere. It's smooth, unnaturally so, and entirely blank. But when you touch it, just a tap, it vibrates slightly. Not a sound, not quite. More like a pressure, like standing too close to a large bell, or a very large voice trying not to speak. You don't stay long. As you step out of the graveyard, your eyes catch something you hadn't noticed before. A row of 6 small stones tucked along the outer edge, almost hidden under the long grass. Children's graves, unmarked, arranged in a perfect arc, all tilted at the exact same angle as the Watcher stone, and something odd about their placement. You count your steps between them, exactly 13 paces apart, each one consistent, deliberate. It's the kind of pattern that feels like a ritual or a warning, depending on your mood. You look up at the trees again, still leaning east, and you wonder, is something pulling everything in that direction? Not just gravity, not erosion, but something deeper, older, hungrier, a quiet that isn't quite silence, a pull that isn't quite natural, a graveyard that rearranges itself, not to forget the dead, but to keep them organized. You step away, breath catching just once as your boot brushes a clump of turned soil, soft, fresh. You don't dig. You just move on, letting the crooked headstones fade behind you, letting the village's silence fold over them again like a blanket, neat and patient. You walk on, deeper into the hush, where the earth rises in soft, uneven folds, as if the landscape is shrugging under some invisible weight. The trees thin out again, giving way to open space, and there it is. At the forest's edge, nestled like an afterthought, sits a stone, just one. Rounded, flat, about the size of a picnic table. If your picnic involved absolutely no sitting down, it looks like any other weathered lump of geology, the kind you'd see on a nature trail and politely ignore. But this one is different, because it's warm. Not just sun-warmed, not surface level. Warm, even though there's no sun. You crouch beside it, press your hand to its surface, and feel it radiating faint heat. The kind that shouldn't be there. The kind that seems to come from underneath. In Penhid, they call it the hearthstone, though no one ever cooked on it. No one ever sat on it either, not after the first time. That tale naturally begins with a dare. Children, curious and full of poor judgment, dared one another to sit on the stone one night during a blood moon. Dafydd was the brave one, or the foolish one. He sat, made a joke, and laughed. Then he stopped laughing. Not suddenly, gradually, like forgetting how. He looked up at the others and whispered something they couldn't quite hear, then walked home, alone. He didn't speak again, not once. Lived 42 more years. Never said another word. Not out of trauma or stubbornness. He simply didn't seem to need language anymore. As if he'd been spoken to in a way that filled up all the room inside him. His family said he always kept his feet warm, even in winter. Never wore shoes again, never lit a fire. Said he didn't feel cold. Not once. People stopped daring each other after that, and then they stopped going near the stone altogether, until someone noticed the moss never grew on it. The rest of the village is covered in moss, lichen, fungi, and the general fuzz of long abandonment, but not the hearthstone. It stays clean and warm. One night, a hunter laid his kill atop it to dress the animal. Nothing grotesque, just the usual medieval deer butchery. The meat spoiled within the hour, turned gray, sour, ruined. The hunter left the village not long after. Rumor has it he moved inland, grew grapes, and never touched meat again. You step around the stone, examining it from every angle. It doesn't hum, it doesn't whisper. It just sits there, quietly, persistently radiating a heat that feels neither natural nor entirely hostile. Just indifferent. A scrap of cloth lies tucked under the edge, partially buried. You tug it free. Faded, but you recognize the weave. It's from a monk's robe. The initials stitched into the edge. G.A. Griffith Abanarod, a scribe from the monastery of Llandewibrafai, who vanished during a mapping expedition in 1391. One of the last records in his journal described a smooth stone that throbbed like breath and felt like fire dreaming, which is not the kind of entry you expect from someone professionally obsessed with measurements and margins. The journal was recovered. Griffith wasn't. Theories abound. Some say the stone covers an underground spring of geothermal activity. Others suggest a buried forge, though there's no evidence of metalwork anywhere nearby. Still others say the stone is a marker, a capstone, something designed to hold something in, or mark where something last emerged. The open mouth symbol appears again, scratched faintly on the southern edge of the rock, this time with something new, a line trailing downward like a drip, or a root, or a tail. You press your hand there. It's warmer. Just under your palm, you feel a shift, not a tremor, not movement, just a thickening, like the air folded in on itself, for one heartbeat, then released. You pull your hand away, and the warmth lingers, long after it should have faded. Historians still argue whether the hearthstone was ever used ritually. It doesn't align with solstice points. It's not part of a known religious structure, but it keeps showing up in local stories, always peripheral, always quiet, like a footnote that's somehow doing all the heavy lifting. There's a ring of trees surrounding the area, ash, rowan, birch, protective trees, or warning signs, depending on your superstition. All of them bend slightly away from the stone. You sit in the grass for a while, watching, listening, waiting. Nothing happens, which is exactly what makes you uneasy. Because in Penhid, silence is never just silence. You rise, brushing off your hands. The warmth in your palm has faded now, replaced by a pins and needles sensation that lingers all the way up your arm. You walk away without turning back. But as you pass into the trees, you feel it, that soft heat at your back, like a breath, or a gaze, or both. You walk through the thinning forest, stepping lightly now, as if your feet have begun to learn that here, the ground remembers. And it does. Every pressed leaf, every bent twig, feels like part of a living diary the village never wrote down. Up ahead, tucked behind a thicket of slow and wild rose, you see it. A low, lopsided structure with a roof that looks like it's exhaling. Its chimney leans at an angle that defies both gravity and architectural self-respect. There's a crooked wooden sign still hanging beside the door, etched with a faint loaf of bread and a smiling sun. The village bakery, or what's left of it. It smells faintly of flour even now. That ghostly scent of yeast, old butter, and hearth smoke clings to the stone like a last memory. Inside it's unexpectedly clean. The hearth sits at the back, large, blackened, and cold. Ashes scatter the flagstones, but there's no cobwebs, no dust coating the bench or flour bin. The table near the center has 3 dents in it, where elbows once rested over and over again by someone kneading dough and humming out of habit. You walk through the space, feeling the low ceiling press close. The oven itself is a wide-mouthed brick affair, built into the wall like a hungry grin. Its door hangs ajar, iron warped slightly as though from heat or something pushing back. This was where Iolo the baker lived and worked. The only baker Penhead ever had, according to local accounts. Iolo baked every day, even on holy days. He had flour when others didn't, water when the well was dry, salt from no known source. People said his loaves never molded, never crumbled, and never ever cooled. And Iolo screamed, only at night, only on Thursdays. No one ever explained why. They say the screams didn't start until his wife passed, taken by a cough that ate her breath from the inside out. After that, Iolo went quiet during the day, just worked. No humming, no chatting at market, just flour, water, and silence. But every Thursday night, screaming. No one knew why he picked Thursdays, but the whole village heard it, muffled through thick walls, sometimes high and keening, sometimes low and guttural. Once, a visiting peddler asked if wolves lived nearby. The reeve shook his head. No wolves, he said. Just grief that still fits in the lungs, which is poetic, but doesn't explain why no one else ever heard it from the inside, because that's the strange part. Visitors who stayed in the bakery heard nothing. More than one traveler took shelter there. The hearth was always warm, blankets in the loft, a sense of welcome, oddly preserved, and yet, on Thursdays, nothing, until they left. Then, and only then, did they realize they couldn't remember sleeping, or dreaming, or even blinking. Just the soft smell of bread and a sense that someone stood nearby, always just out of view. Historians found no record of Iolo's death. No grave, no will, no final baking. Just an empty house, still warm, oven cleaned, the last loaf cooling neatly on the windowsill, untouched. Locals refused to eat it. Even the goats avoided it. There's one odd record, found in the edge of a ledger for grain allotments, scribbled between lines. The bread breathes if you slice it wrong, which raises a few questions, and some indigestion. You move to the oven, crouching low to look inside. There's no smoke, no heat, but something about the soot patterns feels fresh, like it's not done baking. You resist the urge to touch it. On the shelf above the flour bin sits a small wooden box. You open it gently. Inside, one loaf of bread. Perfect. Untouched. Warm. You close the box. You don't take the bread. Instead, you notice something carved into the table's underside. Not deep. Just shallow scratches, as though made by a dull knife or the edge of a fingernail. It reads, "He feeds the quiet." And beneath that, faintly, "Thursday is his night." Now you may think, who is he? Iolo? Maybe, or maybe not. Because the quietest places in Penhide always have something else beneath them. And sometimes the thing underneath gets hungry. Historians still argue about whether Iolo was a genius, a recluse, or a man touched by grief and something stranger. Some fringe accounts say he was part of an older order of bakers, yes, really, who believed bread held memory. That when made in silence with sorrow, it could anchor a soul. One fragment of a prayer book found in nearby ruins contains a half-burned recipe labeled simply, "For binding, bake before moonrise, feed only to the willing." It's mostly flour and salt. But there's also a symbol, the open mouth again, drawn beside a loaf. This time the mouth smiles. You leave the bakery, the air heavier behind you. Outside you swear you hear a soft breath, not wind, just breath, and the faintest scent of fresh bread, even though the oven's cold, even though no one's inside, even though it's not Thursday. You walk back out into the open again, and for the first time you notice the sky. It's not cloudy, not quite clear either, just still, like a painted ceiling in a place too old to renovate. No birds still, no wind. Just a sense that the air above you has decided to stop performing sky duties and is now simply present, watching perhaps, waiting. You pass between two crumbling fences that seem to frame nothing in particular, and enter a part of the village that doesn't show up on any of the old maps. Just a wide, flat expanse of grass that never seems to change length or direction, no matter how long you walk it. And then the sun doesn't move? No, really. You look up, blink, check again. The light hasn't shifted. Shadows don't stretch. Your feet feel no change in temperature. It's as if time itself has hit pause, but forgot to tell the grass, which still crunches underfoot in patches of frost that shouldn't exist in midsummer. This is where they say the sky went flat. It happened once, at least officially, a winter morning. Cold, yes, but not abnormal. The villagers rose, lit their fires, prepared their oats and broth and bread with hollow crusts. And then someone looked up, and the sky wasn't moving. No drifting clouds, no birds, no sun's slow slide from east to west. Just a big, motionless canopy of dull light. Flat, matte, quiet. They waited. An hour passed. Then 2, still no movement. And the village grew strange. Milk curdled without reason. Bread refused to bake. The well water rippled as if wind touched it, though none did. A flock of sheep wandered in tight circles for hours, bleating rhythmically like a ticking clock. Children stopped blinking. The sky remained flat for 3 days. Then all at once time caught up. The sun jumped position. Shadows snapped back. The air groaned. Yes, groaned, like a cathedral beam settling. No explanation, no storm, no warning. Just resumed. Since then, this field has never been right. You can feel it, like walking on a page that hasn't been written yet. The grass here bends differently. There's no insects, no scent, just space. Blank space. You crouch and touch the ground. It's not cold, not warm. It's nothing. You press harder, it gives slightly, not like soil, more like fabric, or parchment. You stand up quickly. In the village records, someone tried to describe the experience of living under the flat sky. They wrote, "It was like God stopped speaking, and the silence was shaped like us." Another account, later scrawled in the margins of a field inventory, notes, "We were not frozen, but time forgot our names." Poetic villagers, apparently. Historians argue about it, of course. Was it a solar phenomenon? A hallucination brought on by spoiled grain or moldy rye? A meteorological anomaly? Some think it was a memory, an echo of some older moment trapped in the land. Others think something was watching, and the flat sky was its blink. One child who lived through it, Mira, claimed she saw things moving in the sky during those 3 days. Not birds, not stars. Shapes. Slow, large, smiling. She drew them in chalk on the bakery's side wall. They washed it off twice. It came back overnight. Mira stopped drawing after that. You glance at the field again. It's unmarked, unburdened. You try to cast a shadow. Nothing. That's the moment you realize the sky still isn't quite right. You squint upward, then back down, and your shadow flickers. Not with you. Ahead of you. Just by a step. Then it matches again. Then doesn't. Like it's learning. You walk. The field stretches ahead, same as it has. Flat. Endless. But you're moving now. Picking up speed. Not running. Just keeping your shadow in check. And suddenly the path returns, as if it had been waiting just off to the side. And the world tilts back to normal, almost with a pop. The sky above shifts, just slightly, and the breeze stirs the grass. Time resumes. Mostly, You don't look back, but if you did, you might see your shadow in that field, still walking, still trying to catch up. The path bends again, more sharply this time, as if it's suddenly remembered where it's supposed to lead. You follow, stepping into a narrow lane, bordered by hedges that sway ever so slightly, even when the wind doesn't. Ahead, the houses grow sparse. These are stranger homes, more spread out, their walls tilting like they leaned in once to eavesdrop on a secret, and never quite stood back up. Their chimneys are taller too, slender and wrong, like a child's drawing made of fever and impatience. And then you see it, a figure on horseback, frozen in stone, or rather what's left of it. The statue sits near the center of what must have once been a wide courtyard. The horse's head is bowed, its rider is gone, or maybe was never there. The saddle is empty, the reins snapped in half, but a crown, simple, unadorned, and just slightly too small, rests on the stone horse's neck. The royal audit came here once, just once. It wasn't planned. Royal audits rarely visited Penhid, since the village contributed roughly nothing to the crown, except the occasional overripe turnip, and a story no one believed. But in 1361, a clerk named Hugh de Fenwick was dispatched on a routine sweep of borderland properties. He came with 2 horses, 3 assistants, and the confidence of a man who believed very much in ledgers. He left alone, refused to speak of what he found. His written notes, retrieved months later from a storage chest in Brecon, contain little more than expense tallies and a single line scrawled at the bottom of the page. We found a door that we did not build. It was in the cellar of the Reeves' old house, by most accounts. A home long abandoned, tucked into the south edge of the village, beneath a twisted oak. The cellar had always been strange, cooler than it should have been, even in summer, and with walls that sweated inward. When Hugh's men opened the door, they claimed they felt wind from below. Not just air, wind, cold, wet, and full of sound. One clerk fell backward down the steps. He was never seen again. Hugh sealed the door, filed nothing. He told his superiors there was nothing of value, which was technically true. He retired early, moved to a village with no cellars. You pass the statue, watching it flicker in the corner of your vision. The crown is not quite resting, it's balanced, as if it could fall at any moment, but never does. The Reeves' house is still standing, barely. The door hangs from one hinge, groaning with a sound that shouldn't be made by wood. Inside, the air is cooler, more humid. You descend a short flight of steps, each one bowing under your weight like it's remembering someone heavier. The cellar is small, stone-walled, muddily floored, and in the far wall, there it is. The door, not made of wood, not stone. It looks like iron, but it's darker, more matte, more like obsidian wrapped in soot. There's no handle, just 3 small indentations spaced evenly across the center, finger-sized, familiar. Above them, carved shallow into the frame, is the now familiar symbol, the open mouth, this time with something inside it. A spiral, tight, coiled, almost moving. You don't touch it. Good choice. One later account from a friar named Oswin claims he came to Penhid in 1404, decades after Hugh's visit. He went to find the door. He found it. He wrote, "The door does not open, but it understands the idea of opening. It wants to be invited." No one has seen Oswin since. Theories endless. Historians still argue whether this door was ever part of the original building. Its placement, its material, and its design all suggest something entirely foreign. Nothing like it exists elsewhere in Wales, or Europe, or really, architecture. Some suggest it's symbolic, a later addition made by villagers to contain grief, or memory, or guilt, a metaphor. But metaphors don't hum, because this one hums, softly, low enough to almost miss, like someone speaking behind a wall with their mouth pressed to the stone. You step away, back into the air above. The light is dimmer now, though the sky hasn't changed. You glance back at the statue, and you swear the crown has tilted slightly. Or maybe you're tired. You keep walking, past the royal remnant, past the houses, back into the edges of Penhid, where the trees begin again. The cellar door remains closed. but you can still feel it. It doesn't want to be opened. It wants you to wish to open it. And that's worse. The trees grow thick again, not in number, but in mood. These are old trunks, ash, birch, the occasional blackthorn, all leaning at mild but meaningful angles. They don't feel like they're swaying in the wind. They feel like they're listening, quietly. You walk now in silence deeper than before. Not the empty kind, the full kind. The kind of silence that settles on your shoulders like a heavy blanket and tucks itself in tight, whispering, "Stay still." You're nearing the far edge of the village now, the part they never spoke about. And that silence, it gets louder, not metaphorically, literally. There's a pressure here, a hum just below hearing, like the world's holding its breath, but through clenched teeth. You don't hear it with your ears, you feel it in your bones. And the further you go, the thicker it gets. This part of Penhid was never mapped. It's not in the church records, not in tax ledgers, not even in the oral accounts collected by folklorists and wide-eyed graduate students. People simply stopped noticing it. But here it is. You step between two standing stones, each worn smooth, each carved faintly with the open mouth, now almost completely eroded, and suddenly it's like you've stepped through glass. The air is still, the light is still, but it's different. The cottages here aren't collapsed. They're paused. That's the only word for it. Roofs halfway through, sagging, windows cracked but not broken, doors ajar like someone just stepped out and never returned. There's no decay, just suspension. You pass a table with a cup still sitting on it. The liquid inside hasn't evaporated. A chair lies tipped slightly, not fallen, just beginning to fall, forever beginning. And in the center of it all, there's a circle. Not stones, not trees, just empty space. Grass doesn't grow there. Leaves don't fall there. Nothing enters it, not wind, not light, not birds. It is a circle of nothing, and it buzzes. You walk closer. The noise in your skull rises, not sound exactly, like your blood's trying to whisper something to your brain. The circle pulses once, and then, faintly, impossibly, there's a voice. Inside your head, not words, not a language, just shape, feeling, meaning bent around the edge of comprehension like breath on glass. It feels like, welcome, and also, wait, you don't move, not because you're afraid, but because you suddenly deeply understand that stepping into the circle would be a kind of choice. And once chosen, not unchosen. One final tale survives about this place. It's not in any books. It comes from a child who left Penhid, one of the very few, who grew up and spoke, once, of what she remembered. She said, "Some nights the quiet got too big. You could feel it coming up the path. If you tried to look at it, it wasn't there. But if you listened, really listened, it wasn't not there either." When asked what happened to the others, she just said, "They faded. Not vanished. Not died. Faded. Like stories no one tells anymore. Like a sound you forgot was playing until it stops. Like Penhid itself. Historians have tried to explain the village's disappearance. War, famine, land collapse, political redistricting. Simple, reasonable, boring things. But every explanation falls short. Something always fails to line up. The records don't end, they just stop. Like someone set the pen down and never picked it back up. And here you are. The final house in view has a curtain still fluttering, even though there's no wind. A single boot sits on the porch, perfectly placed. Inside empty, of course, but not abandoned. You can feel it now. The quiet here isn't lack, it's occupation. The village didn't die. It just grew still enough to notice something else was listening. And then it listened back. You step carefully around the circle, past the soft, humming quiet. The cottages fade behind you as the path narrows, then disappears entirely into wild grass and small stones that no longer form direction. The silence doesn't leave. It stays with you, but now you know why. Because something here wanted to be remembered, and something else didn't. So the compromise was made. The village faded, but the quiet stayed, and now it knows you. The path begins to slope downward now, gently, like an old song winding toward its last, soft note. The sky stays still, but the light slowly fades. inch by inch, like dusk exhaling. Your steps get lighter. The grass seems quieter beneath your feet. The trees thin once more. And soon you're back on that mossy, forgettable road where it all began. The village behind you hums faintly, though you can't tell if it's memory or sound. You pause for a moment. Feel the air on your skin. It's heavier now, but not in a frightening way. More like a thick blanket pulled over your shoulders. A weight that says, yes, you were here. And maybe, just maybe, Penhid was waiting for that. Maybe it needed someone to remember the bell that rang off rhythm. The goat with the unsettling gaze. The bakery that screamed only on Thursdays. The hill that hummed, and the bread that breathed, and the cellar door that didn't quite belong. Or maybe it didn't need anything. Maybe it simply is. And now you know that. So you walk slower. Let your breath stretch out. Let your thoughts drift. Let the shadows lengthen without asking where they come from. There's nothing left to see tonight. Not really. Only quiet. But it's a different quiet now. Full of stories. Full of strange warmth. And full of a village that never really disappeared, just learned how to hide in stillness. The last thing you hear is a soft breath. Not yours. Then stillness. Then sleep. Good night.